I do want to say thank you for coming. My name is Brent Sleesman, and I am the president here at Weinbrenner Seminary, and just want to take this moment again to say thank you for attending. And we're going to pause just to invite God's presence on this moment, and then I will introduce our speaker, and we will carry on. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity you have given us just to gather today. We praise you for your creation, and in the midst of jokes about the weather, there is so much beauty around us, and we do look forward to just the spring season that will eventually arrive. And Father, we pray that your Spirit leads this time. Thank you for allowing us to gather together, and just pray that your joy will work through all of us, and pray for Nancy Tate, our speaker today, that you continue to inspire us with stories of courage from those that have gone before us. We thank you so much, and we pray this in your holy name. Amen. It is my incredible privilege to introduce Nancy Tate to be our speaker for today. She is the former executive director of the League of Women Voters, but when we were talking briefly and asked about that notion of former, that does not mean that she is not actively engaged in many different avenues, and you'll hear both in her story and also what I share here just in a moment about her history that brought her to this point. From 2000 to 2015, she served as the executive director of the League of Women Voters in the United States, and that's a nonpartisan organization that encouraged informed and active citizen participation in federal, state, and local governments. And she will be sharing more that we're coming up on a very important anniversary in the conversation about voting in the United States. She has been involved in private and public sector government and in government, and has been engaged in a variety of organizations. Specifically, she was an elected member of the National Academy of Public Administration, which is an incredible honor where others, peers and colleagues recognize the value that she brings to those conversations, and recognized and invited her into that arena as well. She is also here serving as the Woodrow Wilson Fellow, visiting fellow at the University of Findlay, which is a fantastic opportunity where someone outside of the academic community walks into the academic community to bridge that divide. And even this event, this luncheon, in many ways serves that same purpose, where we're an academic community, but we want to make sure we're giving back to those that might not see themselves in academia. And so the Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow Program at the University of Findlay is a wonderful opportunity for her to come to Findlay and also to share with us today. So I want to invite Nancy Tate to our podium, and we look forward to what you have to share. Welcome, and thank you.
Is that working? Can you hear me? All right, well, thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I want to thank all the people who asked me to come to Findlay University and to the seminary and to this luncheon. And before I start, I'd like to get a feel for who's in the room, just by the type of organization that you represent, and therefore the type of leadership situations you're in. So how many people are in the educational field? Well, great. And then let's students. I know there's students here, so we have some students. What about in business? Are there people here from the business sector? Great. How about from the religious sector? Are there? Oh, wonderful. Any other nonprofits? Oh. How about government? All right, not too many of those, but quite a good mix. Well, thank you. Well, I'm from Washington, D.C., and people may have a mixed view of that, but I'm going to just keep on going about that part. So let's see. So when we think of leaders, and we certainly think of a lot of leaders in Washington, D.C., and leaders that we recognize and revere, and of course, hopefully you can see and do respect George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Here is a group of, more recently, of generals. You might not know them all, but usually we do think of leaders, we hold leaders, military leaders in high regard, and know that they must have leadership skills to do what they have to do. These are the people who are aspiring to be our next leader. So there's a lot of leadership conversation going on in the country right now, and these are the people who are hoping to be that #1 leader. These, of course, there's other leaders who were leaders in their own time. They thought they were leaders. Other people also thought they were leaders, but have not held up as well in our own memory, or we don't revere or respect what they brought to it. So I'm not sure that everybody even knows who the gentleman on your left is. This is Grover Cleveland, who was so well liked in the late 1800s that he was elected twice in 2 different non-consecutive elections. He was known as a very highly moral, ethically progressive person, but he faced a lot of challenges and is now considered sort of in the second tier of presidents. The gentleman on the right is Herbert Hoover, who was a highly respected engineer and well known in the after World War I for leading massive humanitarian relief in Europe after World War I. But of course, we mostly associate him with not doing a good job on the Depression. So here's another person that was, I think we have to say, was clearly a leader. A lot of people followed him. Not a person that I think any of us, or hopefully anybody we know, would want to emulate, and who at least I consider I associate with evil, but he was a leader. So this shows that there are different kinds of leaders. They are, I have to remember, they are different from each other. They face different situations and challenges, and they themselves evolved and changed over time, sometimes for better and sometimes not. So that's one thing we can conclude here at the beginning, is there is no one model of how to be a leader. So leadership, by its very nature, is inherently dynamic. Now, I'm not going to walk through all of U.S. history, and that take a little bit longer than we have here at lunch. But I am going to highlight a period in our history that I am working on now and focusing on with the League. And that is the long fight for women to get the right to vote in this country, which we refer to as the women's suffrage movement. That was a 72-year fight starting in 1848, but I'm going to focus the most on what happened what happened 100 years ago, and that is the last 4 years that led up to the passage of the 19th Amendment, which was in 1920. So those would be the years 1916 and 1920. So I'm going to, so there were many leaders. I mean, it takes 72 years. There were a lot of leaders. Of course, a number of the leaders were actually were men. People like Frederick Douglass were active in the women's suffrage movement. But I'm going to focus on the 2 women that led the campaign that finally pushed the amendment into reality in the last few years, 100 years ago. Now, can anybody identify these women? Do you have a clue? It's not Susan B. Anthony. She was dead by the time. She was the first generation of suffragists, but she was dead by then. So I don't think I have a pointer here, but the woman on the left is Carrie Chapman Catt, and the woman on the right is Alice Paul. So Carrie Chapman Catt was the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association and had over 1 million members, both men and women. She came up with what later became known as the winning plan. What was it that they finally needed to do to get a federal amendment that would guarantee women the right to vote, since that had not succeeded in the previous 70 some odd years? And that was a joint effort to get President Woodrow Wilson and the United States Senate and Congress the president had to propose a bill, the House and the Senate had to pass it, and then it has to, any constitutional amendment has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So that meant a lot of state-by-state political organizing here in Ohio, all over the country. And that took a lot of organizing to get individuals in all those states to get out and talk about the cause and talk to their own decision makers. She was very well known in her time. She was credited with having incredible political sense, being a master strategist, the ability to organize millions of men and women across the country, and being charismatic. And one interesting note is that despite personally being a pacifist, she made sure that once the United States entered World War I, that the NAWSA, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, undertook a number of activities to support the war effort, while at the same time continuing to advocate and educate the public about the importance of the women's vote. Now, this is fortunately a younger picture of Carrie Chapman Catt. She was probably in her late 40s by the time the amendment passed. A much younger woman was Alice Paul, and she took a much more radical approach. She actually broke away from the main body, the NAWSA, the main part of the suffrage movement, decided they were moving too slowly, and formed a separate suffrage party, the National Women's Party. And her strategy was to focus on visibility and making more of the American public aware of what women were being denied and the importance of letting them vote. So her group was a lot smaller, but it was still numbered in the thousands, so she was able to recruit thousands of women. And her emphasis on visibility ultimately turned to becoming more militant, not violent. In England, some of the suffragettes, and they called them suffragettes in England, were actually violent, but not in the United States. But they did get more in your face, so to speak. And they started protesting in front of the White House. And there are many pictures of them standing. In some cases, they even tied themselves to the fence in front of the White House. But they stood in the rain and the snow with banners saying things like, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" And because they were saying that after we had entered World War I, after a while, President Wilson and the administration got kind of uncomfortable with them being out there kind of bugging him. And they were all arrested. And they were sent to prison, and they were roughed up quite a bit. And they considered themselves political prisoners, and then they acted like political prisoners. Some of them were treated as if they were insane and were wrapped up in straitjackets, and some of them went on hunger strikes and were therefore force-fed and had their jaws clamped open because, of course, it would be embarrassing if these women, died while they were in there. So the point is, these two leaders conceived and executed very different strategies and visions of how to achieve their shared goal, a federal amendment guaranteeing the right to vote to all women. And I will point out that in a few of the Western states had already voted for women to have the vote before the country at large did, and that was mostly in the West, and the first state was Wyoming. So these ladies were very different. Their personalities were different. Their strategies were different. And actually, they disliked each other very much. And these two different strategies bumped against each other, and they criticized each other, even in the press. And this is true of many social movements, as many of you know. I mean, it's not like everybody's completely marching to the same drummer. There is tension. There are decisions to be made. But it worked. Ratification of the 19th Amendment guaranteeing women the vote occurred on August 26, 1920. This enfranchised 26 million women of voting age, or approximately 1/2 of the whole population on one day. But it was a fight right down to the end because it took 3/4 of the state legislatures to approve the amendment as it went around. And even though a lot of them approved it right away, in the last few, they started to lose momentum. And it actually passed by one vote in the last state. One young man, one state assemblyman in Tennessee, switched his vote in favor of suffrage after receiving a letter from his mother urging him to follow the guidance of Carrie Chapman Catt. So if you're at all interested in this, there's a wonderful movie that came out about 8 years ago called Iron-Jawed Angels. And they call it iron-jawed because of those clamps they put on their mouth. Focuses on the Alice Paul story. It's very powerful, and just last fall, a second movie came out called Suffragette about the British movement. The Iron-Jawed Angels had Hilary Swank as Alice Paul and Angelica Houston as Carrie Chapman Catt. And the one last fall had Carrie Mulligan as a working class woman in Britain, realizing all of the opportunities that she did not have, and connecting that to an ability to vote that where she could improve her own place in life. And Meryl Streep played one of the roles in that. So those movies and these examples shows what these women leaders had to do to lead and win. They had no official power. They had no ability to influence decisions with their votes. They couldn't threaten not to vote for somebody because they weren't even part of the system. There were virtually no women in any senior leadership jobs in the government. The first woman ever elected to the Congress was Jeanette Rankin in 1918, so that's one person. So of course, we like to say they had the right on their side. They had a great cause. They used moral suasion, but you needed a lot more than that, and they had to learn to do it themselves. They had to raise a lot of money, just like any campaign, to get the word out, to get your volunteers fed and so forth. You have to raise a lot of money. They had to develop political skills and be comfortable using them. This was a very different type of role for most women, particularly in that era, to get up in front of people, as I am doing now, and urging them to do something and get out of their comfort zone. As part of that, they had to develop communication skills. They actually had to create a way of explaining the importance of women in the vote to a population, which of course was not used to it, and they created their own symbols and ways to portray this as a positive development and not threatening. It wasn't taking anything away from men, it was adding the touch of women, the ability of women to clean things up and be role models as they were for their children. They had to have incredible endurance. So even though none of the original suffragists lived long enough to see the end, all of the ones who worked for a long time had a lot of ups and downs. They had to fight these battles state by state, and a lot of times they lost. They had to have the endurance to just pick themselves up and keep going. They had to have physical courage. So not only did the women who were jailed and strapped down and force-fed have to have courage, but the other ones who traveled around the country in undesirable situations, not always knowing what kind of crowd they were going to face, because there were people who were against women voting, and part of the energy from that actually came from the liquor industry. So money was going into the fight against them. It wasn't like we'd just get everybody to agree with us about a great cause. And they had to have emotional and moral strength to persevere through years of insults and ridicule. You can imagine over these last few years, as we have had women candidates running for office in this country, we know that things are said about them. You can imagine 100 years ago, when you had no precedent for that, what type of things were said for women who were labeled as unfeminine, to say the least. So I'm very proud of this history, and I want to share it, because I think in this context in particular, it's a leadership story that is rarely told. It reveals real dynamics of leadership, and it's especially important to me because Carrie Chapman Catt was the founder of the League of Women Voters. And she created the League just before the amendment was finally ratified. Because just having the right to vote is not enough. You have to use it. You have to turn out and vote, and you have to be informed. And so the League was formed partly to help educate all these women who weren't following the issues, presumably, because they had no role to play. But also to finish the fight, and that was a term she was using in that context, but for the League currently, it means to finish the fight to empower everyone. So that everyone in our democratic society can be empowered and engage as much as possible. So the League is an organization. We are a national organization. We're based in Washington, D.C. We have 50 state leagues, and we are active in over 700 local communities. We are open, by the way. We are not a women's organization, just to clarify that for you gentlemen. We were created that way, but in the 1970s, we realized we were really, just as women needed to be educated on the issues, we found out that about 50 years later, men were not so well educated on the issues either, so we became what we call a citizens organization and provide voting information to everyone. So as Carrie Chapman Catt said, the vote is the symbol of our equality. And that is certainly as true today as it was for women in 1920. So what are some of these examples from history? How does that relate to any of us as we work on a day-to-day basis with the challenges in our own organizations? Most of us seldom get and probably don't even want the kinds of huge challenges that faced all of the leaders that I've had up here before. But we do face challenges, big and small, all the time. And so often, the way forward is unclear. It's hard to know what to do. And since we're all different and bring different skills to the mix, and the situations are different, and the techniques are different, how can we know if we're making the right decision or picking the right path? And this is one of the questions that we're going to throw out to you at the end when you're able to talk with folks at your table. So what is leadership? So I am going to go out on a limb here and tell you what I think leadership is. So I use this formula. Very simple, but leadership equals vision plus motivating others. So I'm going to go through each of these parts. Vision, in my mind, is the ability to imagine something different and better than the current reality. Now, that could be fixing big problems. Maybe you're in a terrible financial situation. You have a vision to get out of it. Or it can be moving to a new goal. Now, I know sometimes people have visions of sugar plum fairies before Christmas, and we might have a vision of the perfect IT setup for our office, but usually in the leadership context, we understand it to be something more noble, something a little bigger than ourselves, something significant that we're trying to accomplish. And we do know that having a strong mission and leaders who exude a vision are very important to millennials as they are coming into the workforce. And getting to that new place, that new reality, implies action. It implies change and movement. So it's another part of the dynamic nature of leadership. You've got to be moving somewhere. And it's sort of in that sense that I'm distinguishing leadership here from management more generally. Because the question is, can you be a leader if you don't have a vision, a goal, or an idea of where an organization needs to go? So what about other people? Can you be a leader if no one is following you? I would say that having a great vision is not enough for a leader if no one else shares it with you, if no one shares your commitment, is not willing to work with you. You can, of course, strive to be the best individual you can be, and many times either you're based on your performance or your moral example. You do serve as a leadership by example. But again, in an organizational sense, and in this context of leadership, I'm saying that I'm talking about it is usually you need people around you to be a leader to them. So how can we go about getting other people to follow our lead or to agreeing with us on what our vision suggests? So, all right, so I got to make sure I didn't forget to click. Motivating. Well, we know that one way to motivate people is fear. And many countries around the world use this very successfully. Certainly when we use the example of Hitler, that was the case. But even on the job, many people are nervous about, they use the threat, someone might use the threat of demoting someone or firing them if they don't go along with the boss. So clearly a much better approach is inspiration. And there are a lot of different approaches and techniques about how to inspire people in different situations, and probably many of them have been discussed here in your other Leadership 1 sessions. One of the things I would stress is the importance of having communication skills, good communication skills, clarity, and taking the time to realize how important it is for people to understand what you were saying and understand it more deeply than just a few buzzwords. I see motivating as an active, not passive activity, and it's never done. It takes continual effort and commitment by leaders. So again, in that sense, it's dynamic. And just to say a few words about other people, when you're motivating them, how do you even start? Well, you have to be able to connect with them. You have to have some way of connecting, which usually stems from mutual respect. It's very important to establish your respect for them as well as trying to gain their respect. Listening, as you probably all know, is very important. Listening to what people say and sometimes what they don't say or what they infer so that you have a better idea really what's going on there. And when you're doing all of these things, sometimes that style is referred to as servant leader, kind of listening and then type of taking a consensus and going forward. So I believe all of these things are core components of leadership. And the best situation is when they both exist. You have a compelling vision, you've been able to articulate it, and the people around you have embraced it. And they're part of it, and they're enthusiastic, and in that sense, you're having a shared leadership model. And that's great, and that's what we all aspire to. But sometimes it doesn't happen that way. And that's especially can be true when a new leader starts in a new job, or when you're faced with a crisis, something that shakes up the situation the way that you're all used to doing things. So then often there's a dilemma between whether to, as a leader, to take an approach that focuses on emphasizing the vision. We're going to go here. This is what we're going to do. Or one that says that may be more bottoms up. Let's hear what other people have to say. Let me build on that. And I would say you can encounter problems either way. It is, again, not one of these is never right all the time. We all know that if we push other people too hard and they don't want to do it, either they don't do it, they don't do it poorly, or, and your idea doesn't get implemented. But if you rely, you're going to have other situations where if you rely too heavily on just getting the views of the current staff or the board or your local members or whatever, that can be problematical too in some cases because it tends to lead you to solutions that favor the status quo. It's much harder for the people in the bubble to think of something new. And so you might end up with a path of incremental change, which again might be okay, but these are the dilemmas. How do you know which would be best? So in my own job, I was frequently caught between this type of pressure, pulling in different directions, between developing initiatives that moved the mission of the League and our vision forward to meet new challenges. Clearly, a lot of things have changed. I was at the League 15 years. A lot of things changed over 15 years, let alone the 95 years that we'd been in existence. So focusing on adapting to the new reality, but yet trying to be fully responsive to the wishes of the 150,000 members that we had. So those members are volunteers. They are not the staff of the National League. In fact, most leagues have no paid staff at all. They are volunteers. They are civically minded people in the communities. And they're the people who do the work of the league on the ground, the local registration or the debates or so forth. It's very important to know what they say and what their concerns are. However, the mission of the League of Women Voters is to empower all voters. And that makes it bigger than just serving our members. So that been a tug and pull that I experienced repeatedly. And oftentimes the experience in a local community, in one local community is quite different from another. So it wasn't always something that could be scaled up to the national level. So this may or may not be a situation that some of you have faced in your own organizations. So I have found that the most challenging part of leadership is the part that it's dynamic. All these different situations, these different people, what is the best thing to do? There's so many things to think about, and there is no one right answer. But I do think there are a few other characteristics of leadership that will help all of us as we try to decide what is the best thing to do. So if we go back to the original equation here, that leadership equals a vision of where you want the organization to go, plus a commitment to motivating others, I would say you also need adaptability. As a leader, you need to be capable of adjusting your leadership style to the situation when that is necessary, and sort of the insight and ability to determine that maybe you have to change the approach you prefer to take to adapt to a different reality. I would say you also need courage. You need to be willing to stand up to criticism because any of us who've been in leadership jobs know somebody is not going to like something that you did, and you have to know that going in, and you have to have the courage to Follow the path once you've decided what it is. And you need self-awareness. To know yourselves, your own styles, other pieces of information or other skills you might need to know well enough how to navigate the dynamics here so that you do what's best for yourself and for your organization. So I congratulate all of you for attending programs like this because clearly you're interested in hearing new information and learning about leadership skills, and taking time during your busy workday I think is very commendable, and I really congratulate the Weinbrenner here for putting on this program. So I'm going to stop now. We're going to turn some questions over for you all to discuss at your tables, which I believe is the normal format. Afterwards, I can take questions if you have questions, but for now, I'm going to let you all be dynamic at your own tables and chew on these questions. The first one being relating back to at least experience that I've had and many people that I know have had. Have you, each of you, ever experienced the tension between trying to focus on the goals you think are best for the organization or spend more time on meeting the needs and understanding your employees, your members, your congregants, your constituents or whatever? Has that been a problem? Has it been a tension? If so, how did you resolve it? You might have had this on several different occasions. Maybe you handled it differently at different times. And did it work, or did you wish you might have done something different? So with that, I turn it over to all of you to chew on these things, and I thank you very much for having me.
But if you have any questions that you would like to ask our speaker, she has graciously offered to provide a response to those. And so this can be more of an informal time, and I can run around as much as I need to run around. Or Ginger will run around as much as we need her to run around with a microphone. Are there questions that you would like to ask Nancy Tate in response to her experience, her speaking today, other items that you brought with her?
Oh, right, here's one. I like it.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for speaking with us today. I had a question. A couple months ago, Madeleine Albright came out and said that if you're a young female voter and you're not voting for Hillary Clinton, like, you are in the wrong, you should be ashamed. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, because like you were saying, you encourage people to vote on the ideas and the politics at hand, not based on someone's gender. So, but she was very influential in women getting into government. So I just want to know your thoughts on that statement.
The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, and I'll stand up here so I can see everybody better. What nonpartisan means is we don't take any positions on any candidates, we never support or oppose any candidate, and we never support or oppose any political party. So I cannot respond one way or the other to your comment. But I think just for some additional information, women, I may have mentioned this already, women actually do turn out to vote at somewhat higher percentages than men at this point in time. But there's a difference in everybody, you will find out that you have a higher turnout rate among married people, both men and women, than single men or women. So a lot of the strategies for all the candidates are aimed at the different pockets of marital status and men or women. But in terms of any of the particular candidates, I'm not going to answer.
It didn't seem so much that it was like vote liberal. It was, she's a woman. It doesn't matter if she's a liberal or a conservative. You need to vote for her because she's a woman.
That is not the position that the League of Women Voters takes. And it's that you just automatically vote for anybody based on anything, that the voters should make their own decision about that.
There's somebody over here. Right here.
When we look at things going around in the world, and we see in our history, it's taken a long time for women to not just gain the right to vote, but equal wages and so forth. We're still not there. Then you have countries where a young lady like Malala is shot because she's standing up for the rights of women. Right. Where do you think other parts of the world are in terms of looking at the women voting and women being involved in the processes?
Well, it actually varies quite a bit in some respect, and in some of the countries that we think of as not very open to women culturally have actually changed so some of the countries in Europe, for instance, have actually changed, Greece, I'm going to say, have changed their constitutions so that they require a certain number of women elected. So they have changed it, and some of the Latin American countries have changed their constitution so that more women will be elected. Now, that still doesn't mean that the women in those countries are necessarily any better off. So different countries have worked around these things in different ways. Of course, we know there are a number of countries that repress women terribly. The League has been interested in women, although, as I mentioned, we're not exclusively a women's organization, and in international issues really from the beginning. We were present at League members in the 1930s were advocating for the United Nations, feeling that it was very important for countries of the world to come together and have peaceful solutions. So the League was actually present at the founding of the United Nations, and we still have a legal status there where League members are present with the groups at the United Nations. So we're working with women's groups. We host that. We're very concerned about the countries where women are treated terribly. It's hard to know what to do. As we know, there's a lot of repressive situations and a lot of violence. So in some of the programs that we have, we try to improve that, but it's difficult. It's a great concern to us. That's why we continue to work on international issues, even though we're mostly focused on voting, because so many of our members are so concerned about women overseas.
To what do you attribute more women voting than men? And then my second question is League of Women Voters, and you've said you've integrated men into the organization, and why does it still have the women, which sounds rather confining? If you'd answer that, please.
I'll answer your second question first, because we get that quite a bit. You know, have we ever thought about changing our name? Well, our answer is, well, actually, in terms of what we do, we're not limited to voting. I've already mentioned international work, and we're actually not limited to women, but it's a great brand name and we're sticking with it. So partly because we did host the presidential debates in the 1980s, we have a lot of brand name recognition, and if we change to the League of Men and Women Voters, or the League of Voters, or the League of American Voters, you know, nobody's heard of that, and we're sort of starting over. So it's a valid point. It does not describe really who we are, but it's a brand name that we're sticking with. In terms of women turning out to vote, I think it's women in many cases see that what the government decides to do has a lot of impact on women's lives in terms of education for their children, in terms of health care, in terms of a variety of issues, and they feel like doing it. And it's been a long time now. I mean, it's been at least 40 years that women are turning out more than men because they perceive that government policies, I think, can affect them directly, you know, one way or the other.
We tend to have a much smaller percentage of people turning out to vote than many other countries. Why do you think that is? And are there things that you think your organization can do to help increase that percentage?
Yes, there are a lot of reasons. Yes, we do have a lower percentage. I mean, a really good year in a presidential year is 63% turnout of eligible voters, and in many years, in non-presidential years, of course, it's a lot less. A lot of the most advanced democracies have declining rates of turnout as well, so it's not just us. In our case, there's a variety of reasons, and some of the people who've heard me give my election speech have heard me say this. But for one thing, the US system of elections is highly decentralized. It is not run by the national government. It's mostly run by the states. And that's a feature of the US Constitution that gives the right to, or the power to regulate non-federal elections to the states. So that means there's a tremendous amount of variation, and everybody comes up with their own laws and their own rules, and some of them affect people differently than others. So the laws can make a difference. Some laws actually, we feel, and we do lobby against these, restrict some groups of people. And one of the groups that's underrepresented in the electorate is young people. Young people turn out at a much lower rate, at 50%. And one of the reasons is there are a lot of rules and procedures, and they don't know what they are. And now some schools make it easier for them to know that, but there are a number of colleges in small towns, such as this, but this is not the case here, where the local community does not really want the students to influence local decisions. And so they put the polling places as far away from the school as they can get away with to make it hard for the students to get there. So you can have different laws and rules that are kind of discouraging, that are not apparent on the face of it, but they can play out that way. But another thing is, because there are a lot of rules, you have to know what the rules are. You have to be registered in the United States to vote. You must be registered. If you are not registered, you cannot vote. And in most states, you have to have registered at least 30 days before the election. Some states now allow same-day registration, but it has a certain set of procedures. But most states, and Ohio is one of them, you have to have registered at least 30 days before the election. Well, if you miss that deadline, you're not voting this year. You have to know what kind of identification you have to show in order to register, or in order to when you actually show up to vote. So at a bare minimum, you must be 18, you must be a United States citizen, and you must be a resident of the jurisdiction in which you are voting. And that hurts a lot of younger people, because a lot of times they're not sure. Do they want to vote at home, where they're at their parents' house, or here at school? Then there's different rules. If you want to vote at home, but you're really here on election day, you needed to know about absentee ballots, and you needed to know about deadlines. So there's a lot of rules, and they're not the same every place. So it puts we have a system, therefore, that puts a lot of the responsibility on the voter to know all these things. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, so we have people voting in Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Each of those three jurisdictions has different times for the polls on election day. Some of them start at 6 a.m., some of them start at 7 a.m. You know, so you gotta, if you show up at the polls, and I have been a poll worker and had people come like 10 minutes to 7 on their way home from work, they've gone to the wrong polling place. It's just too bad. You either, or they got there 5 minutes after. Well, you're not holding the polls open if the person, yes, if they're in line, but not if they show up after the doors are closed. And if you go to the wrong polling place, you're disenfranchised. So there's a lot of things inadvertently in here that work to that. Another thing is, a lot of times when you go to the polls, you know, something happens. One of the machines breaks down. There aren't enough poll workers. And you get long lines, and a lot of people can't afford to spend 3 hours waiting in line, so they leave. So they turned out, but they're not counted in the numbers because they didn't actually vote. And then, of course, you have a lot of people who are discouraged by the political environment. They're not motivated. They either think it's too disgusting and they don't want to participate, or they think it doesn't matter. On the other hand, they think, well, they all say the same thing, it doesn't matter anyway. So all of those things contribute to a situation, and that is one of the League's main challenges. We do, in both cases, work in all the states to have the best laws that will encourage them, make it as easy and reasonable as possible for people to vote, to not put undue burdens on anybody. But secondly, to educate voters so that they know what they need to do, so that they have the information to get registered, to get out to the polls, and then to make their own informed decisions. We don't try to influence anybody on who they should vote for or what they should vote for. But I see the hook is coming here, right?
Can we show our appreciation again? Thank you, Nancy, for joining us today. And as we wrap up, we just have a few more moments, and I'm going to turn over to Ginger and Lisa as we conclude.
We're going to do a giveaway, but first I just want to make sure that everyone saw this flyer on your table here. We just want to invite all of you back to the Taste of the Summit on April 26th. Every year we host the Global Leadership Summit in August here, and so this is just a chance to come and get a sample teaching. Dr. Henry Cloud will do a teaching through video to give you an idea of the level of teaching that we have at the summit. So that is a great event to come to. It's free, and we will feed you again, but you do need to register at weinbrenner.edu. And then the other thing that we wanted to invite everyone to was the naturalization ceremony tomorrow. Nancy is one of the keynote speakers there, and I thought I had it memorized. Okay, it's tomorrow at 12:30 at the Kaler Center. There's 16 individuals that are going to be becoming citizens. So that's, if you haven't experienced that before, we encourage you to go and see Nancy at that as well. And I think that's all. We'll do our giveaway now. We have some Dietz's chocolate for you all today. We switched it up a little bit. So we got some. Lisa's a professional.
Kim Winhelm.
All right.
Congratulations.
You like Dietz's chocolate, right?
Pry it out of my dead hands.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming today. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.